Chintamani Prakara Sadmasu Kalpa Vriksha.
The first time I saw Srila Prabhupada was a real eye-opener. Of course, I'd heard about him, I'd seen his picture, I'd seen the devotees on the street, and I'd heard him chanting, and I'd been visiting the temple. You know, I was a rock musician trying to make it in London. I'd gone to London trying to make it as a famous musician. But I kept seeing the devotees everywhere, and I was attracted, started going to the temple. Then 1973, Prabhupada was coming, and for Rath Yatra. So this was the first time I was ever going to see him. So it started at noon at Marble Arch, and I arrived there just a little bit late. The procession had already started, and I went to the front of the procession, and Prabhupada was dancing on the road, surrounded by a circle of devotees. That was in 1973. He was 77 years old. He danced the whole way. It's about a 4 or 5 mile route. He danced the whole way, and I was just standing there watching, and it was like really ecstatic. And sometimes he would stop. He'd dance and he'd get a little further ahead than the cart, which normally happens. Then he'd stop and turn around and look at the cart and, you know, raise his arms up looking at Lord Jagannath. And the police, you know, when they see that the parade was stopped, then they get a little anxiety and they say, could you please ask the Swami to, you know, move it on? Oh yes, officer, but they never did, you know. And so he danced all the way. That was quite awe-inspiring, just to see a 77-year-old man filled with the ecstasy of Krishna Prema dancing the whole way. So, and then when they arrived at Trafalgar Square, they had a big ceremony, including a wedding, a fire yagya, a whole thing. So that was my first experience with Prabhupada, really grandiose and fantastic.
First time I met Srila Prabhupada wasn't until 1973 at Rath Yatra in London. And I'd been associating with Prabhupada's devotees since they were number 1 or number 2 of the hit parade in London in 1969, so it took me a long time to actually meet Prabhupada. And I was out in the crowd at Rath Yatra, big crowd, distributing these really nice special magazines that the devotees, the London Yatra had printed up for Rath Yatra. And I was distributing them. And I'd seen Prabhupada earlier in the day in a kind of a rushed way, getting out of a big car. And suddenly, all the hairs in my body, just for no reason, they all stood on end. And I felt this incredible, like, surge of energy. And I looked over my shoulder, this way, and there, like, behind me was one sannyasi or whatever, and next to him was Prabhupada. He was right behind me. And he was dancing with his arms raised and jumping up and down, and Swami stepping and the whole lot. And it was just incredible because I actually felt Prabhupada before I saw him. And to this day, I can still remember that incredible joy that went through my body at the sight of Prabhupada dancing and chanting. It was amazing.
The first time that I saw Prabhupada was a picture of Prabhupada. It was on the back of the Chintamani album. I visited these 2 people. Had moved into a little cottage behind the farm I was living in upstate New York, and I went to be neighborly and say hi to them, and they invited me in, gave me some tea, and there was some music playing, and I said, oh, that's nice. They said, oh yeah, it's this guru, and they showed me this guru, Prabhupada, and they showed me his picture on the Chintamani album. And he was smiling, and they said he's really high. I go, yeah, he sounds like he's really, spiritual. And then they turned the album over and they said, and this is God. They said, he's got his own planet. And I thought, yeah, that I like that idea. And so that was the first time I saw Prabhupada's face. And at that point I was interested in what was happening, so I went and bought a Bhagavad Gita.
Having come since 1969, you build up an expectation after hearing 2 years of lectures and coming every so often and seeing pictures and hearing Prabhupada talk. So when it actually occurred, I thought I would be seeing an amazing human being. And it was so far beyond that, so miraculous, that for 28 years, since I just had it confirmed that 2 other people saw the same thing I did when Prabhupada came up. He came up the escalator. This is at Detroit Airport. A lot of kirtan going on. Vyasa was set up. Came up the escalator, and one would normally expect Prabhupada to walk off the escalator. Prabhupada didn't walk off the escalator. He kept coming upwards off the escalator, floating above the escalator, and started to float over to the Vyasa. While this was happening, there was a brilliant sun-like effulgence coming off of him. And I have never hallucinated before that I can remember. And when I saw that, Prabhupada then gently floated down and settled into the seat. At that time, the next time I raised my head was 20 minutes later, after my head was on the ground crying for 20 minutes. And when I looked up, everyone else was also down. There were a few people. I remember Lakshmi Moni was looking at Prabhupada and tears were coming from her eyes. And I thought that this was just my experience, and then just recently, both Indradyumna Maharaj and Sureshwar told me they had seen the same thing. And I've been reflecting on this and what this really means, beside it being a miraculous event. There's been a lot of talk recently about the importance of Vani, that the instructions are the most important thing. But I really think that Vapu is equally as important. And why is because it gives you faith in the Vani. That's why I think these remembrances are important, because for those that did not have the fortune to see Prabhupada, if they can have an understanding that not only was he not just another human being, but he's also not just another pure devotee. He did something that is unique in the history of Vaishnava culture, in the depth of his surrender and where he went around the world. So I think it's very important to have both equally. And if one could not have the fortune to be there, then they can hear about it.
Seeing him visually and hearing his voice directly, of course, as I said, I had no doubt. There really weren't any doubts in me. I was very clear that this was a perfect master. Somehow I knew that. And by reading his books in very rudimentary way, following his path. But by seeing him directly, there was a deepening of the conviction that he was, in fact, in harmony with the divine, that he himself was a true saint. I never thought that he was God or a God. I thought he was a saint. And frankly, I always found that more interesting. Because being a person, a man, a human being, a jiva, and yet being so well tuned to the divine, so perfectly tuned, so finely tuned to the divine, that's very inspiring, because it means there is some hope for us. If we see him as a god, just like the Christians, they actually, many of them, give up on any concept of perfection. They even find it repugnant. That cannot be achieved. So they really don't try much. But Srila Prabhupada's, of course, his mission was very clearly to avoid being tagged as a god or as God. Nirvisesa Sunyavadi. This was main part of his mission. Main part of his mission. All the gurus at that time were becoming God. And Srila Prabhupada was very clearly not God, not a god, but a saint. And that was a very real thing for me. To accept someone as a god is a sort of mass hypnosis. It's a sort of a mass agreement to be in some type of delusion. And in deep in our heart, we know that. It's kind of a fakery, a great fakery. But to see a real saint, that's a very profound truth.
And I remember one day they had a darshan. Everyone was packed into Prabhupada's room. And there were a lot of guests there, and some of them were challenging. And I remember one time they were challenging Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was just sitting there, tolerating it. And I was getting agitated. You know, I was really getting agitated with these people, that they were speaking in a challenging way to Prabhupada. I couldn't control myself. Prabhupada was completely transcendental, but I got upset and I made some comment, you know, real nasty comment to shut them up. I was trying, because I had some feeling for Prabhupada. Prabhupada just looked at me, very grave, didn't do anything. So those were my first experiences with my spiritual master. That was in London. But I was still along here at Hippie, so I don't know what he thought of me, I still wanted to make it as a musician, but I'd always be going to the temple. And I remember one time at Berry Place, I was there for Tulsi Puja, and Peter Sellers came in. And he was very famous at the time, and he came in, pranams like this, and he went down on his knees and bowed down to the deities and everything. There's a lot happening in London in those days. So.
Well, I had association with Prabhupada before I took Gayatri, in that I used to clean Prabhupada's rooms. And it's an interesting little observation on how Prabhupada was. That I used to clean Prabhupada's rooms up in Bombay, again, up those 2 flights of stairs, the old quarters. And one day, somehow I mistimed, and I was halfway down the stairs when Prabhupada was coming up the stairs. So I jumped into somebody's kitchen and paid my obeisances. But he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "So, you are chanting Hare Krishna?" And I said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." And he said, "Jai." And then off he went up the stairs. It was really cute, because I realized, again, years later, you think about these things, and that's what Prabhupada wanted, just to chant Hare Krishna. And another funny incident, going up those 2 sets of stairs again, was one time, I think it was Bhaktisiddhanta's appearance day, and we'd cooked a big feast for the deities. In those days in Bombay, we cooked a feast on any of the appearances, disappearances. We'd always cook 108 feasts for the deities, for Radharasa Bihari. So we cooked this big feast. So Hamsa Dutta was with Prabhupada, and he said, "Oh, you should show it to Prabhupada." So you can imagine, we got these big lids to those big Indian pots, the big lids, and we put it must have been pretty much all the preparations on. And we carried it across Hare Krishna land, up the stairs, and it all went into Prabhupada's room. And Prabhupada sent us a message. This was Sava Mongol and I did all this carrying up the stairs. And Prabhupada sent us the message, "This movement is nothing without its feasts."
So I had gotten my degree in biology from University of Buffalo, and I always wanted to use that. So I wrote to Srila Prabhupada, it must have been 1972 or 73, and said, "Can I come to India and study under your Ayurvedic doctor?" Prabhupada had an Ayurvedic physician in Calcutta, and I wanted to dovetail in that way. So I didn't get an answer, and because Srila Prabhupada was traveling a lot, but I had collected and I came to India, and I went to Delhi and stayed at that temple, and Prabhupada was there. And I remember the first time I brought this up to Prabhupada, Shrutikirti was massaging Prabhupada on the roof of the Delhi temple. It was a beautiful sunny winter day. And I walked up and I said, "Srila Prabhupada, my name is Satyanarayan Das. I wrote you about studying Ayurveda under your..." And he interrupted me and he just went, he said, "Not now." I thought, why don't I just jump off the roof at this point? Because my first real meeting, I guess, I just felt, besides the initiation, and I felt I had displeased him by my very presence. And so I just, okay, Srila Prabhupada. And I said, but I'd like to talk to you about this later. And the later was about 5 months later in Calcutta. And I was ushered into Srila Prabhupada's room by Satsvarup Maharaj. And he kind of said, okay, you can ask him this if you like. It was kind of, he kind of sensed what the answer would be. And it was an incredible vision. When I walked in, Srila Prabhupada was sitting like this, like he used to do behind his desk. And in a very comfortable way, he was gesturing to the devotees present. And the only problem was there were no devotees there. Srila Prabhupada was, he was having a discussion, and I interrupted the discussion. And I have this understanding, just because of the situation, that he was talking to someone. I don't know who it was. Then Narada Muni was discussing with his Guru Maharaj, but there was a clear discussion going on, and he looked over, and then we had our talk about the Ayurveda. And Prabhupada said, he again interrupted. He said, this is not necessary. He said, whatever medicine that works, use it. He said, Western medicine is very advanced. Western medicine is very advanced. And when he said that, I got the impression that it really didn't matter if I got involved with this or not, or he wasn't impressed with Ayurveda. He said, whatever medicine that works, use it. And he lifted up his book and he said, work with my books. I think it was the Krishna book. He said, just work with my books and be a spiritual physician. Be a spiritual doctor. And, it was such a relief, because I really felt that for some reason, I had to make use of this, educational investment I had made. But there was, I've learned that there's, material education, you can get an impression, or you can get analytical abilities which you can apply in Krishna consciousness. You don't have to use that specific knowledge. So, I was so relieved, and soon after I joined the library party, where I went many places all over India, by Srila Prabhupada's grace, to 14 countries outside of India, hundreds and hundreds of universities. And the feeling was wonderful whenever you'd put a set. I had done single books before, but when you put a whole set, Prabhupada said, it's like installing a deity in the university. It will be there for hundreds of years. And the feeling was very wonderful.
Srila Prabhupada had a continence that was very powerful. I remember walking once with him in New York, in Brooklyn, from Henry Street to the old press building, which you may remember. You had to cross the freeway, cross this bridge, and you went into a very bad section of warehouses. And even in the mornings in those warehouses, you would find cars that had been stolen the day before, and they were stripped down. So this was the kind of place it was. So one morning we were walking. It was a chilly winter morning, no snow, but chilly. And Srila Prabhupada, of course, had his head slightly tilted up and his cane, and there were 3 or 4 of us. And as he walked past these row houses, in the stoop of the houses, sometimes this is where street people would sleep, winos and people that have homeless people. They would sleep in these stoops because they were slightly in the ground, They went down to the lower flat. And it was perhaps a little warmer or free from the wind, I don't know. So there were three, it came this one morning that there were three men, they looked like winos. They looked quite tattered and torn and from their face and their clothes, quite beaten by the world. And they were sort of sitting, lying on the stoop. And as we came along on the side of them, they suddenly noticed Srila Prabhupada. And all three of them, without communicating to one another, they just stood up like soldiers, like somebody had pulled them from the nape of the neck. And they just stood up straight in line and like saluting Srila Prabhupada. And they looked at him with awe in their face and their eyes open, and they nodded at him in recognition. And Srila Prabhupada turned and said, Hare Krishna, and marched right by like that. It was quite a surprising thing. But this was how Prabhupada's countenance was, that when he was in a place, people recognized that somebody is here, even they had no idea who he was.
I remember in New York, he said, even if a drunk man, I guess think there were, somehow we were saying, I guess Prabhupada was in the Bowery area there when he first came. He said, even if a drunk man in the Bowery, he may have said Bowery, I don't remember exactly how he said that. He said, even if he sips wine and he says, oh, Krishna makes the nice taste of this wine. He said, even if he does that, he will achieve perfection eventually, if he has that attitude. So that was,
Actually, there's another interesting story in Bombay when I was cleaning Prabhupada's rooms. And I left the light on for him, because Prabhupada was just, a minute away or something, and I put the light on as I left the room so that he wouldn't have to put the light on when he came in the room. And Prabhupada said, who has left the light on? That kind of, I don't know the exact words, but that kind of thing, because he was very concerned about lights being left on and things like that, because he was very concerned about Krishna's money. He didn't like lights. Even though I'd done it as like a service, he didn't want the lights left on. He was perfectly capable of switching a light on.
My most intimate association with Srila Prabhupada was in 1976 in November in Vrindavan. I was traveling with the Southeast Asia Library Party, and with Satyanarayan, and we had gone up to Kashmir, which is a Muslim, 90% Muslim district area. And we were going to the colleges there and the libraries and distributing books. So I found one library, an Oriental library, with an old gentleman there, and I was showing him the books, and he said, oh, I think I have these books. I said, no, it's not possible. It's the first time we've come here. He said, let me see. He went back, and he brought out Prabhupada's 3 original Bhagavatams. So I said, that's fantastic. And now we have, you should take all the rest of them. So he took the whole, all the rest, the whole complete set of Bhagavatams, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Gita, Krishna book, everything. So that was really nice. So he said that the author had come there personally. So that was far out. Nobody knew that Prabhupada had gone to Kashmir. So on our way back, driving back through the Himalayas, we passed an apiary where they had beehives and everything. And we were thinking, wow, wouldn't it be great to get Prabhupada some real Himalayan honey. The real thing. So you got a big bottle like that. And we knew that Prabhupada was in Vrindavan, so we wanted just to go straight back to Vrindavan and tell him that we were preaching in Kashmir and we'd distributed books, in the Muslim areas, and the Muslim colleges had taken it and like that. So we arrived in Vrindavan, and Jagadish was Prabhupada's secretary at the time, and he knew me and Satyanarayan from Canada, in Toronto. He knew me, and he knew Satyanarayan from New York. So he said, okay, I'll try and arrange it. And then he came out a few minutes later and says, yes, Prabhupada will see you. So we came in, and Prabhupada was sitting with Gopal Krishna, and he was speaking to an Indian gentleman. And when we came in, he turned around and went like this and said, here are 2 very nice boys. So we came in, and we sat down, and Jagadish introduced us. And Satyanarayan spoke first and explained we'd been in Kashmir, and we preached and everything like this. We were the library party, and he was very pleased. We were distributing his books. And then his eyes opened really wide when he heard we were in Kashmir. He says, Kashmir. I went to Kashmir. And he said, do you remember when you come over the crest of the hill and you see the Kashmir Valley? Yes, Prabhupada, we saw it. And he said, yes, I distributed my books there. So then I spoke up. I said, Srila Prabhupada, I met that gentleman. He took your first 3 volumes. And then I distributed, after that, he took the whole set of your books, standing order. So that was nice to connect with Srila Prabhupada. So he was reminiscing about that. We spoke for about 5-10 minutes. And then what really stuck in my mind was just before we left, he looked me right, he was speaking about preaching and everything, the importance of preaching. Then he looked me right in the eye and he said, so, wherever you go and whoever you meet, just tell them about Krishna. And in this way, you become Guru by Lord Chaitanya's order. And that really left a big, he was looking right at me. So when I left there, I thought, wow, if I don't tell people about Krishna, I'm in Maya, total Maya. So I thought, this is my mission. And we gave Prabhupada the bottle of honey, which he graciously accepted. And then Palika, who was his cook, she told us later that every morning Prabhupada used to like to have a little bit of that honey with his breakfast. So that was very nice.
I think one of the important experiences that I recall about Srila Prabhupada is that in his presence, I always felt the reflection of myself in his eyes was the very best that I could be. Beyond my own faith in myself, he had more faith in me than I had in myself. And I recognized this early on because I had this experience in a fractional form with 2 earlier teachers in my life. One was my music teacher, and he had that nature, that he believed more in me than I believed in myself. Now, Srila Prabhupada, I think this was one of his profound, or not profound, I think this was one of Srila Prabhupada's strong leadership points, is that he saw the best in us. Of course, a person tends to see others related to how they are. A thief will think everyone is trying to cheat him. And Srila Prabhupada, being a saint, he almost naively, I say that with the deepest respect and affection, almost naively saw in us all good and saintly qualities. He could, of course, realistically observe our faults, and did. But on the overall, we felt in his presence that he saw the very best in us. And we felt also that I don't want to disappoint him. I've never been appreciated like this before, and I'd really hate to disappoint him, because I really like this identity of being a pure spiritual person, a servant of Krishna. So that was a very strong, encouraging thing about Prabhupada, interacting with Prabhupada. So he always treated me as if I was some sort of gentleman, and very polite to me, and very courteous to me, and very concerned about my well-being. And that was very effective to increase my desire to do something special for him and to not disappoint him.
One time in New York, we ran out of white flour for the feast, and I had to make samosas. I had already cooked up all the cauliflower and the peas, and we had the filling was all done. And I go to look, and there's no white flour. So I made it with whole wheat flour, which just quite doesn't work, I can't get it to be flaky, but I made them anyways. So the Maha went up to Prabhupada, and Shruti Kirti was Prabhupada's servant at the time. And so I was waiting anxiously in the kitchen, and there was that little stairway in the back that came right from Prabhupada's quarters into the kitchen. And he came back down with a tray of the Maha, And I said, so, what, did he say anything? I said, what did he say about the samosas, He said, well, he took one up and he took a bite of it and he said, Sudam Swami makes nice samosas. And I said, oh, okay, so I said, so that's his cue, who I'm supposed to go talk to if I want to make nice amos. So it was a nice way of, giving me instruction without criticizing.
I remember one time as well, we were in Prabhupada's rooms, because when Prabhupada came to Bombay, which was very regularly, we'd all go to the airport. The whole temple would go to the airport, which was very near to Hare Krishna land. We'd all go and meet him, huge kirtan, all jump in taxis and come back and go up to Prabhupada's room. And one time I was holding Radhakund and Jashamati Nandan's eldest daughter. She was just a baby. And Prabhupada, he knew who was who, because he said to me, where's the mother? He wanted to know where the mother was, and I said, I was cooking. He took an interest, a personal interest in each devotee.
Once in Calcutta, I had a little tiff with my wife, and we had the occasion, Srila Prabhupada somehow became aware of it. Not that it was known in the temple, but I think he could see on my face that day that I was a little disturbed, so he probed. And I mentioned this. We had had a little debate, little argument. And Srila Prabhupada then was inspired to sort of speak about his family life. And he said to me, my wife was very tolerant. He said that was her great qualification. He said, and to this day, I still regret how much harsh I was. He said, but what can I do? I have a very haughty temper. And he said it with the greatest sincerity and humility. So here's a person feeling regret. Those were his words, quote unquote. A little remorse. Not only the powerful orator, the knower of the supreme truth, the mystery of the Bhagavad, but a person as well who felt sad if he had hurt others, or felt a good laugh when he heard a good joke, or he was a person in every respect, and the most sublime and developed person.
I think there was someone at the Bhagavad Dharma lectures that asked the question, it was a guest, and Prabhupada was talking about, he might have mentioned dogs, hogs, camels, and asses at one point, and I think the person said, what's wrong with being a dog? What's wrong with that? And his mood was so challenging, and Prabhupada said, I bless you. It's like, and I think everyone was kind of shocked. But Prabhupada said, if that's what you want. It was like, it was terrifying, actually. Because, as far as we were concerned, that's where he's going,
It was always wonderful to travel with Srila Prabhupada in an airplane. And the first time Srila Prabhupada went to Australia to bring the deities there, Vaiyasaki Prabhu was carrying one of the deities with him, with Srila Prabhupada. So they had packed their lunch. So when after the plane had taken off and it was time to take prasadam, they unfolded everything and Prabhupada served out and everyone was taking prasadam. And then when they finished, Prabhupada rinsed his mouth and washed his hands. And then he took out a toothpick and he started doing like this, cleaning his teeth. So Vaiyasaki was thinking, oh, this is what you do. You have to clean your mouth after you eat. So he goes down in his bag and he pulls out a toothbrush and toothpaste. Prabhupada says, what you were doing? Well, I'm going to brush my teeth, Srila Prabhupada. I'm going to clean my teeth. He says, that you do before you take prasad. After prasad, you use a toothpick. Because those little pieces in your mouth, that's also prasadam. So, ever since then, I always got toothpicks, and I was always picking my teeth.
So he said to me, "What is the spelling of your name? Is it Abhiram or is it Abhiram?" I said, "Well, Srila Prabhupada, when you initiated me, you wrote Abhiram, A-V-H-I. But you always call me by Abhiram." I said, "So, which is it? You say." He said, "No, both are good." I said, "Oh, what does it mean?" He said, Abhiram means without tiresomeness. Abhiram means always chanting Ram. So it was a casual, light moment, and I said to Prabhupada in a partly joking mood, "So I should always be chanting Ram, Srila Prabhupada?" Then he went grave, as he often did. Folded his hands across his stomach. He was lying down. "We should always be chanting Ram. It is a nasty world."
Well, another interesting thing which shows how personal Srila Prabhupada was is I used to run a Gurukul for local children, poor children, in Bombay. And we used to have rip-roaring kirtans. So one day Prabhupada heard the kirtan. So he asked, "Who's chanting?" So they said, "Oh, there's a Gurukul." So the next day it was decided I should take the children up to meet Prabhupada. So we had a stack of pictures of Radha and Krishna that the children had done. So we went into the room and we handed Prabhupada the pictures, and we all sat down, and Prabhupada looked through the pictures that the children had done. And he kind of, smiled. I think there was some sweets or something given out, something like that. And then, he kind of went, we could go now. But it was so personal that Prabhupada, these little beggar kids practically speaking, Prabhupada took the time to have them in his room, look at their pictures. It just showed what a magnanimous person Prabhupada is.
He said to me, "Everything is so nice in the Western countries." He said, "If they would simply stop eating the cow." He said, "Isn't there any other kind of meat they can eat besides the cow?"
We had the idea of playing songs for Krishna. I was in the road show, and we were playing songs and music and that kind of thing. And it just started off that I found this guitar in the basement of the temple I was in Colombia. And I asked the devotee if it'd be okay if I used it during the kirtans, and he said sure. So I did that. And then while I was up in Detroit, there was a guitar there in the boiler room where the brahmacharis used to sleep. And I was sitting there and I picked it up and I wrote this song, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which was just quotes from the Bhagavad Gita. And I made a song out of it. And Kirtananda heard it and he really liked it. So when he started doing different lectures, he had me come along and sing the song and then also play while they chanted. And that was kind of the birth of the road show. It started off as a little project like that, and we did that, and it was quite nice. And then later on in Los Angeles, after the road show was dissolved as far as a musical presentation, I got the idea of making a record of devotional tunes to distribute to people, let them hear about Krishna. So Krishna Kanti and I started putting that together, and we came up with a little demo of several songs, And Prabhupada came one day to chant. He was going to do this taping, and so we recorded him, and he was done his recording, and he was getting up to leave, and I was really nervous because I wanted to ask him about these songs. So I went up to him with I had the songs in my hand. I said, "Prabhupada, I have these songs I want you to hear." And he looked at me and he grabbed them, and then he sat back down. And then I hope you can edit this stuff out. Okay. So anyways.
Let me tell you, it happens all the time. You're not the first.
Okay. But I think I'm just, the thing that's, I guess that moves me is that he sat back down,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fact that he sat back down to listen to what I had to say. That was like, so, I gotta get past that. But yeah, so anyways, at the time, I wasn't crying. I was just, just afraid, probably. But he sat back down. He put the songs on a little thing there. And I have a photograph of myself, shaved up, Somebody, I don't know who took that photo. Maybe Bhargava did. And so anyways, yeah, and he's looking at the lyrics, and I'm sitting there. And so anyways, we played You're Not That Body from Change Your Heart. It was a little different than we ended up on the record, It was, so anyways, so we listened to that, and then we played, what was the other one? Bhagavad Gita. And I think that's what we did. We just kind of did that and went through it, and he sat and he listened, and he seemed to like what he was hearing, And he said, so, something like that. And I said, well, I said, some of the big men don't think this is such a good idea. And he said, sometimes you have to let cows moo, is what he said, And then he said, do it, it'll be successful. And that's the end of the story, It's just, he gave it a blessing, and so.
One time, this is something else, one time he was resting in London, lying on his bed, and I was sitting quietly attending him. Midday, I was chanting silently on my japa beads. This was a normal thing, to watch him, see if he needed anything. And although he appeared to be resting, he just suddenly spoke. With his eyes remaining closed, he said, "The drum should not be louder than the voice." It was completely quiet, peaceful afternoon in the manor, summer afternoon. I didn't know what he was talking about. All the devotees were out on Sankirtan because they were eager to please him, so they were really a big push for Sankirtan. Temple was empty. I listened very carefully, and I heard through the floorboards underneath Prabhupada, the temple room, I could hear arti going on. I ran downstairs. There was one brahmachari on Madanga, one brahmachari on kartals, and one pujari. And they were doing their arti, singing. And Prabhupada just gave that instruction from his nap. The drum should not be louder than the voice.
I went preaching with Prabhupada once to Ahmedabad. Yeah, we took little Radharasa Bihari, little ones, the deities. We took them with us. That was Radha Krishna. So I don't know whether that's known, but with Prabhupada, we took the Radha Krishna deities to Ahmedabad. He met us in Ahmedabad. He'd come from Mayapur, Vrindavan. He came from Vrindavan, and the Bombay devotees met him in Ahmedabad. And a fairly big room full of important people. I think that Mr. Mahadevia from Bombay went along. It was all his contacts and friends. And Prabhupada said, and I always remember this because it just showed me how Prabhupada was able to charm everyone. And Prabhupada, he looked out at all these ladies and gentlemen, and he was speaking in English, and he said, Bengali and Gujarati is a special birth. He said, Krishna's father was a Gujarati. And they're all smiling and everyone's happy. And another interesting thing, at that point, Prabhupada told Jashamati Nandan to give the class. I mean, A, because he was a Gujarati and he spoke Gujarati, but they were a businessman, they all spoke English. But I think in one way it was interesting to show how Prabhupada was ready to delegate to his devotees. He wanted his devotees to take responsibility for this movement. It's not that he was going to sit there and do everything. He wanted us all to push this movement on together. And I think that showed that the way he delegated, oh, Jashamati Nandan, now you give a lecture. I thought that really showed Prabhupada how he worked.
I was at the Bhagavad Dharma lectures that Prabhupada gave on the in New Vrindavan, Janmashtami 72. And there was a kirtan that almost rivaled my first sight of Prabhupada. Bhardaraj was chanting, and the kirtan seemed to move up over the stage, kind of floated up over the stage, and then Vishnu Jan took it over. He developed it very, very beautifully, and during this time, Srila Prabhupada had closed his eyes and he was playing kartals, and he was doing it with greater and greater force. And the kirtan went on, and Prabhupada started rocking back and forth and really smashing them with force. And at one moment, at a crescendo of Vishnujan's chanting, Prabhupada interrupted him. He completely just interrupted him, just like he wasn't even there, and he started taking over. It seemed like he had to take over the kirtan. And everyone went, all I can remember is about 400 arms outstretched to Prabhupada. We all crushed into the stage, and the tears were flowing. It's like the sky opened up, love of Godhead came down, and Prabhupada was crying, and then everyone, it increased that, exponentially. And I think everyone was just, everyone cried until they were just whimpering. And it was the most amazing kirtan I've ever experienced. And this was, Prabhupada he was like delivering love of Godhead to us. It came through him and he poured it on us.
There were a few conversations going on at that time that sort of all converged and expressed this thinking in Prabhupada about Gita Nagari. In one conversation, it happened downstairs in his house in Vrindavan. He was talking about his impending death. And he said, I have no lamentation in the context of his impending demise, so to speak. I have no lamentation. These are words he would use, death, demise, I'm just paraphrasing him. And naturally he had no lamentation. Sojati, nakanchati. But then he paused after saying, I have no lamentation about my impending death. He said, no, I have a lamentation. And one of us asked, not me, but one of us in the group, 3-4 people were there. You mean because you have not finished Srimad Bhagavatam? Srila Prabhupada said, no. That I have not established Varnashram. He said, 50% of my work is incomplete because I have not established Varnashram. Now these two statements I heard in my own ears in Vrindavan. Then this thought kept coming up, what to do about this 50% of his incompleted work. It was in his mind. So he said on the roof on another conversation that I want to establish Varnashram. And I believe I asked him, how will you do that? It may have been Tamal Krishna, it may have been someone else, but it represented what we were all thinking. So I had the impression that I asked him. That may not be hagiographically perfect, but I was certainly in that questioning mood as well. How will you do it? We asked him. And he said, I will go to Gita Nagari, I will sit down, and I will teach you how to live off the land. As simple as that.
I came to Vrindavan in early 1976. In those days it was all one GBC, and they wanted me to do some work with children in Vrindavan. And eventually I got to clean Prabhupada's rooms. Shruti Rupa had been cleaning Prabhupada's rooms, but one day and I was helping her. And one day she said to me, okay, Moksha, that's it, I'm going, you're in charge. So I was left with Prabhupada's rooms to look after, which was ecstatic. And the way it worked was, after Mangalartik, before Tulsi Puja even started, I'd leave and I'd go in the back way into Prabhupada's room through where the fountain is, although the fountain, I think that came slightly later, but it came around that time, the fountain through the back door. And I'd go into the prasadam room, or the breakfast room, I always called it. And you could see how Prabhupada had walked from his bedroom, the old bedroom, not where the bed is now, obviously, through the prasadam room and into his room, because the doors would all be open. And I'd sneak into Prabhupada's prasadam room, trying to make as little noise as possible, because he'd be sitting right there in his darshan room translating. And I'd slowly, slowly close the doors, trying not to make any noise. But he always looked up, and he'd look up, and I'd, pay my obeisance, close the doors, pay my obeisances, so as not to disturb him. And then I'd start cleaning the back of the house where his bathroom and the toilet was, and his bedroom. So when Shruti left, or even, it might have even been when Shruti was still there, she told me how the Prabhupada was complaining that his marble floor had become stained from the mustard oil, his massages. It looked like the marble stain, but it wasn't. It was actually stains on the marble, and how Prabhupada had complained. So I'd started systematically getting rid of these stains by sprinkling, I don't think you have it in America. In England we have it. It's called like Vim. It's like a white scouring powder. You get it here in India, and I sprinkled it all over the floor. And I got a hard broom, the Indian hard brooms, and I would scrub and scrub and scrub, and these stains were slowly going. So to do that, I'd be like Indian style, sari wrapped around my knees, squatting, scrubbing away. So there I was one day, sari around my knees, scrub, 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 and the door starts to open. I thought, oh my God, it can't be Prabhupada, no. And Prabhupada's head peeped around the door. He didn't open the door completely. He opened it a little way, and he peeped his head around the door, and he said to me, may I come in? Which I thought was such perfect manners, may I come in? Not like, get the hell out of here, you're in my bathroom, but may I come in? So I kind of totally flabbergasted, because Prabhupada never went in the back of his house during that period. It was before he'd go on his morning walk. That was his time. He was at his desk. So I said, yes, Prabhupada, of course, Srila Prabhupada. Come in, Srila Prabhupada. I remember just kind of babbling like that. And I scurried out, and I paid my obeisances in the bedroom, which had a black floor. And I remember that I left this huge mess all this scouring powder, which had been on my feet, on the floor. But Prabhupada sailed over this mess. He just sailed right over it, didn't say a thing, because I could understand he was pleased that these stains were being left. But I always remember Prabhupada's perfect manners. May I come in? It was his house, not mine. He didn't need my permission.
I remember him lying in bed at the manor. And we used to get some nice letters of get well and good wishes for Srila Prabhupada. And of course we would read these to him. So I was reading one letter from our godbrother Siddha Swarup. Now at that time, historically, Siddha Swarup had been a bit of a iconoclast in ISKCON. He was apart from most of his godbrothers. He had his own unique style and perspective on things. And in that exact time, he had really left again. He had come in and then left again and gone back to his own establishment in Hawaii. But of course, he was a devotee of Prabhupada still. So he had written a get well card to Prabhupada, and I was reading it. Prabhupada was lying down, I was standing up, and the get well card said, "Dear Srila Prabhupada," he said a variety of things. I'm praying for your health and this and that. But he came to one particular line where he said, "I am a resident of Hawaii. And I hope that if you think of Hawaii sometime, you may also think of me." And I suddenly heard Prabhupada choke up and he burst out. I was looking at the card and I looked up at Prabhupada's face. And in that span of time, the tears had already come down, halfway down his cheeks. So I don't know if they sprayed out or what, or if they were already dripping. But they were clearly down at the level of his nose, the bottom of his nose. And he choked up and he said, "I am always thinking of you. I can never forget." And this was indicative of the way he was at that time. Any nice thought could bring him to tears and to deep appreciation. Once in London, he was lying in his bed midday, apparently napping. And I want to talk about his sleep and I want to talk about his memory, because these are very, very amazing things. But Srila Prabhupada, when he slept, at least in all of my experiences with him, and in those last 6 months, every single day, I observed his sleep, his so-called sleep. Now, he would relax, he would close his eyes, he would lay his hands across his chest often. Occasionally he would lay his hands at his side, but mostly they were folded across his chest. And you never heard him snore, you never saw, his mouth would sometimes relax slightly. So you knew that he had gone into a type of sleep. But when he arose, when he woke, you never saw any grogginess. He was instantly, his eyes would just very calmly open, and he was fully awake, fully alert. There was no sort of intermediate period, which I found very surprising, especially in his condition and how little sleep he was getting. I never saw grogginess in him. And all of the traumas that he underwent physically, the traveling in such bad conditions, after some surgery, I never saw grogginess. Another characteristic about Prabhupada that was very surprising to me was that sometimes he would have a conversation with me, usually a casual conversation about something, and he would stop midway in the conversation. It just wouldn't progress to a conclusion. And he would go quiet. After a while, a new subject, or nothing. A week later, 2 weeks later, I would be with him, and suddenly he would start talking in the middle of a sentence. And at first, my mind thought, well, maybe he's just rattling on. He's become old, But in my heart, I knew that that's not Prabhupada. He wouldn't do that. So I would search my memory. What is he talking about? And I would always remember then that actually this was the conversation we had had 1 week, 2 weeks before. Exactly where it stopped, he again began talking, expecting me that I would remember. For him, there was obviously no space of time in there. And he hadn't forgotten. So at first my mind would doubt his coherency, only to become absolutely amazed at the incredible power of his memory, and that the fact that there was no time in his consciousness. It was not a factor for him. At least it wasn't a limiting factor for him. I would then spend maybe 5-6 hours in a day massaging Prabhupada different times. Always somebody was touching him, on the feet, on the hands, holding his hand, rubbing his arm, rubbing his leg. He did have pain in his legs. One night, Srila Prabhupada did not let everybody, sort of move him and change him. He was comfortable with certain people that handled him in a very matter-of-fact, proper way. Some devotees were very nervous in touching him, and he felt very self-conscious, and he didn't like that. So there were a lot of devotees now around in Vrindavan, so now I was able to actually get some sleep. I could go in the next room and lie down, and I knew that they were at least 6 or 8 people fully awake watching, and they would call me if anything was needed. So one night, I was lying under the fan, it was hot, in Prabhupada's prasadam room there in Vrindavan. I was sleeping, and some devotee came in and roused me and said, Srila Prabhupada's calling for you. So I came in the room, and apparently some sound had been disturbing Prabhupada's sleep. He couldn't sleep. And he had asked the devotees what it was, but they couldn't recognize it. They couldn't hear anything. So he said, call Abhiram. So they called me, I came in. He said, what is that sound? So I listened very carefully, and I could just barely make out in the distance this slight whoa, 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 which was the ceiling fan that I was sleeping under. I said, oh, Prabhupada, that's the ceiling fan I'm sleeping under. I'll turn it off. He said, no, no. He put his hand on my hand. It is for your comfort. I said, Srila Prabhupada, we are here only for your comfort. He said, no, no, no. I said, no, I don't mind, Prabhupada. I'll turn it off. He was very considerate like this. One day, I was cleaning him. Because at this time, he was only lying in bed. So he had to be really cleaned in every way. Changed fully, all his clothes. This became, by this point, this was required now. And I was turning him. We would change the sheets. As you do, you roll the patient on one side and roll up the sheets under him, and then you roll him back across it and pull the sheet out, and then you do the reverse to replace the sheet. So I was in the middle of this operation, moving the sheet out from under him. And on my hand, his head was resting on my arm was under his neck. And he was looking at my face, although I didn't realize it because I was busy cleaning him and changing him around. And he said to me, it is a nasty business. No, sorry. He said, it is nasty. Questioning. And I looked at his face, and I realized he was talking about me cleaning him. And I said, no, Srila Prabhupada, it's not nasty. He said, you don't mind? I said, no, Srila Prabhupada, I don't mind. I said, if you don't let me serve you, then I will serve Maya. He thought for a moment. He said, that is true. So we kind of knew, and the attitude was that if we ever let him feel undignified or that he was a burden to us in any way, he would just give up the ghost. He had no ability to tolerate any kind of dependency or indignity. He was a very noble, dignified man. At every moment, this was an example of that. If there was an issue that really concerned him, Srila Prabhupada was not a turn-the-other-cheek man. Srila Prabhupada was a strong warrior type, and he was surrounded by many loyal people. His own son was there. He didn't say anything to him. So many devotees who were certainly not in accord with each other. They would love to find a reason to get a favor from Prabhupada and go against the other one. No, it was not a factor enough to enter my diary, even though I was his nurse. And so it came as quite a surprise to me that, this was developed into such an issue. The whole time it was so well known. Every doctor confirmed from even before 1977 that Srila Prabhupada had severe diabetes. As his nurse, I was never bewildered by what his disease was. And Dr. McIrving in London confirmed it. He, in fact, gave a very clear analysis. He said that Srila Prabhupada has had his whole life, obviously, some small urinary tract. The addition of diabetes and swelling from diabetes, this is what Dr. McIrving analyzed, caused further constriction of the urinary tract. So that when Prabhupada passed water, there was a back pressure on his kidneys. He had to push to pass water. That back pressure over the years caused renal damage, kidney damage. The kidney damage meant an increase in uric acid in the body. Increased uric acid in the body means that the digestion becomes very poor, very lethargic, very nauseous sort of feeling in the body, which was exactly Prabhupada's symptoms. Swelling, very, very soft, silky soft skin, feet and hands, but very puffy. I mean, almost, distorted looking, very puffy. You could just squish them like a balloon. Very itchy back. These are all symptoms of diabetes, classic symptoms of diabetes. And Prabhupada's consistent refusal to do anything to take care of it. He wouldn't even avoid sweets. Very stubborn on these things. So it was very obvious what was happening. He was suffering from the complications of acute diabetes and the uric acid poisoning from the kidney damage. Then after that comes, when you're not eating, malnutrition. Then the body starts consuming itself and there's a complete collapse, which is, just exact verbatim what happened to Srila Prabhupada. It was very obvious. Certainly there's a mystical level to all of it, as there is to everything in this world, and certainly to a divine person like Prabhupada. But there are also the external, practical realities. I remember one time, I think it was Brahmananda. Brahmananda said to Srila Prabhupada in Vrindavan in these months that I was describing, his ill months. He said, Srila Prabhupada, you are a Vaishnava. And as such, you have all the powers of the demigods. And Prabhupada kind of started looking at him curiously, what is this going? Where is this going? And he said, since you have all mystic powers, you don't have to submit to this disease. You can get up and just shake it off. And Prabhupada looked at him with great surprise and he said, that is fanaticism. So Prabhupada was ill. He was very much in a human mode. He was not a god, he was a saint. He was a pure devotee, not Vishnu Tattva. Right? And this was the Leela that Krishna had arranged for him. This was the circumstances that Krishna had put him in, and put us in, for all our benefits, out of his mercy. So I think that's a simple summary of my observation as Prabhupada's nurse.
Gargamuni told Srila Prabhupada that two of his men were distributing books. He did the library party to all the universities in Indonesia, a Muslim country. And there were other devotees in Muslim countries at that time also. Padmapani and Tribhuvanath were in the Middle East, like that. So then Prabhupada was so pleased that devotees were going to preach in the Muslim countries, and he told Gargamuni, and Gargamuni told us, Prabhupada said, whoever preaches in the Muslim countries, I take the dust from their feet, put it on my head. So when he told us that, we were in ecstasy. So that was really wonderful. And it was actually, after we did, in Indonesia, we were first on the island of Java, and then from there we went to Bali. We did the libraries in Bali. And it was in Bali that I found out that Prabhupada had left the planet. That morning, because everywhere we went to, we'd divide up the colleges. So Satyanarayan went off to his college, and I was ready to go off to my college. But I just thought I'd call into Jakarta. There was one lady there, Arvindakshi Devi. She was acting as our secretary. And so I called in just to find out how things were going. The books were being sent out and this and that, Then she said, have you heard the news? I said, no. What? You didn't know? I didn't know. She said, Prabhupada left the planet. I was shocked. I didn't know. She said, I just heard from the devotees in Singapore. So I hung up the phone. I didn't know what to do. But I thought Prabhupada would want me to go and preach in his college. So I drove up there. It was on the other end of Bali. You have to go all the way through to the other side. It's a small island. So I got there. This was amazing. I arrived in the college, met the librarian, and got the 2 standing orders. And then as I came out, I met, what was his name? He was the Minister of Culture in Jakarta, who we'd met about a month earlier trying to distribute the books to the library in the cultural ministry. I forget his name now. Anyway, he'll come back. So I met him at the college, just walking down the hall. And he said to me, have you heard about your Guru Maharaj? And I said, yes, I did. Thank you. And I was amazed. Even in Bali, in this little village, in this small town, and everybody knew Prabhupada had left the planet. I was amazed. So I drove down to meet Satyanarayan, the other side of the island, and he hadn't heard. So I had to break the news to him. And we were in our room, and I told him, and immediately he broke down and just sobbed uncontrollably, crying and crying. And, I had this realization that I'm so stone-hearted. I hadn't broken down and sobbed. I was sad, and tears came to my eyes. But I just saw that Satyanarayan had so much love for Prabhupada. He was crying and sobbing. I just really respected him, and I felt if only I could have such a relationship. If only I could have felt that. So that was my experience of Prabhupada leaving the planet.
So I had sent a telegram to Srila Prabhupada because at that time, a lot of the library men would try to somehow communicate with Prabhupada. We knew he was ill. And of course it was all done in that military way. Prabhupada's letters are Camp London, Camp Baroda. So I remember sending one telegram, Camp Surabaya, Indonesia. We've just penetrated the interior, and 20 universities have taken, 20 Muslim universities have taken, and that is a Muslim country. And I don't know, it must have crossed in the telegram, Western Union must have crossed, because I guess when he got it, they said they read it, they would read him the telegrams. But then I traveled on for a day or two more, and Srila Prabhupada had already passed away, because when I got to Bali, he had passed away 3 days earlier. But I still felt the exact, precise feeling from doing the universities, that rush of ecstasy that Srila Prabhupada gave when you would put this set of books in the library. And so it's just an illustration that whether we think Prabhupada is here or not, he's here. You know, when we engage in devotional service and kind of do what he wants us to do, we are rewarded with a type of spiritual recognition of what we're doing. And of course, when I got to Bali, then I had my reaction. But Prabhupada is definitely still here with us.
I remember Bhagaji and I used to reminisce after the departure of Prabhupada. I spent a lot of time in Vrindavan with Bhagaji. After that, we were kind of consoling each other with memories. And to try to sum up Prabhupada was so difficult. Bhagaji tried it one day. He got excited. We were talking about Prabhupada. And I could see he was trying to head to he was reaching a crescendo, and he was trying to sum him up. And he just started sort of shaking a little bit, and he said, Prabhupada was Prabhupada. That's all he could say. He became lost for words, at the last minute. He thought he was going to come up with some but he defies captivity, defies complete definition.
After Prabhupada had left, devotees were collecting memories of Srila Prabhupada, and no one had gone to see his godbrother, Dr. O.B.L. Kapoor. So I decided to go to see Dr. Kapoor when I was in Vrindavan one time and ask him about his memories of Srila Prabhupada. And he gave me a very beautiful story. He knew Srila Prabhupada when he was uninitiated, Abhay Babu, who owned the Day's Pharmacy in Allahabad. And he was a graduate student at the university there, and he had met his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and taken initiation from him. And he was the first non-Bengali to do that. So when Prabhupada moved there, one day in the pharmacy, a sannyasi walked in, isn't it, Tirtha Maharaj, and he said, "Oh, we have heard your name," because Prabhupada had met him in Calcutta, and he'd been studying the books, and he was already a devotee, but not initiated. "And we've heard your name. We want to establish a mutt here. Will you help us?" So Prabhupada was very thrilled to help. So gradually the mutt was started, and Prabhupada used to come and play, and chant and play mridanga and chant bhajans and everything, and everyone really liked him, and he enjoyed being in their association. So the young Adi Keshava Das, Dr. O.B.L. Kapoor, Prabhupada especially was very warm to him, and he said, because I was the only non-Bengali there. So the acquaintance turned into friendship, and friendship turned into brotherhood. And he was 13 years younger than Prabhupada, but he used to come all the time to the pharmacy and to ask questions, discuss Krishna Katha, like that, and they became really close. So one day when he came, Prabhupada handed him a vial. Said, "Here, take this vial, this tonic. This would be very good for your health." So Dr. Kapoor said, "Yes, I will take this, thank you very much. But why you don't give me the tonic that you're taking?" So Prabhupada said, "Well, what tonic is that?" He said, "The tonic of Krishna Prem." Prabhupada laughed. He said, "Well, I don't have that tonic, but I do know the formula." And Dr. Kapoor said, "Well, if it's not a secret, perhaps you can share it with me." He said, "Yes, I can share it with you. It is not a secret. The formula is Trinadapi Sunichena Taroriva Sahishnana Amanina Manadena Kirtanaya Sadahari, and I shall spread it the whole world over." So Trinadapi Sunichena, more humble than the grass. Taroriva Sahishnana, more tolerant than the tree. Amanina Manadena, not desiring any respect for myself, but desiring to give all respect to others. Kirtaniya Sadahari, in such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. So at the time, Dr. Kapoor thought he was just making a casual pronouncement. But he told me, now that I look back over the years, I realized that even at that time, he had a plan like that. He was thinking like that. I shall spread it the whole world over. So I was thinking how Prabhupada said this is the formula to get Krishna Prem. And Srila Prabhupada was the embodiment of that verse. So I want to give some of Srila Prabhupada's pastimes to show how he embodied that verse. So, Trinadapi Sinechena, more humble than the grass. This is a pastime that Srila Prabhupada performed in New York in July 1972. It was just around it was actually the July 4th holiday weekend. And devotees had come from all over the East Coast, from far south as Miami, as far north as Montreal and Toronto, as far west as Chicago and St. Louis. And there were thousands of devotees in the New York temple. And then when Prabhupada was to leave, so many devotees drove him to the airport. And they went with him into the departure lounge. You did just see him to the last second. So the departure lounge was filled with devotees. Now, the airport officials had a problem because there was no room for the passengers who were booked on the plane to come into the departure lounge. So one of the officials looked around and spotted Rabindra Sarup, who was kind of a tall person, and said and explained the situation to him and asked him if you could ask your people to kindly leave so that persons who are on the plane can come in to the departure lounge and to board their flight. So he said, okay. He could understood the situation and went and spoke to a couple of devotees, but no one was having any of that. I'm not leaving, no way. Then he realized that he's not going to get anywhere. Now, Rupanuga had just taken sannyas in May of that year, so he was a new sannyasi and he was a GBC. So Rabindra approached Rupanuga and explained the situation to Rupanuga and asked him if he could take care of it. So Rupanuga immediately, okay, done. So he got up one of the chairs and he said, attention all devotees. We now have to leave the departure lounge to make room for the incoming passengers. So all devotees, please get up and leave the departure lounge. No one did anything. Everyone just sat there and looked at him, except for one person, Srila Prabhupada. He got up and started to walk out. And Rupanuga said, no, not you, Srila Prabhupada. He was so humble. When he heard that devotees should get up and leave, he got up to leave. And no one else did. So this is the symptom of humility, more humble than the grass. He was the only humble Vaishnava in that assembly. Taroriva Sahishnuna, more tolerant than the tree. This pastime took place in 1975 when Prabhupada was going for the first time to South Africa after he had been in Kenya. And he was flying on the plane, and on that plane was the South African football team who had just played in Kenya. So they were a rowdy bunch, and they'd won the match, and they were kind of, happy and upbeat. So after the plane took off, the stewardesses came round, they were serving drinks, and these guys were taking their drinks and getting a little high and a little rowdy, lighting up cigarettes. Now, it's a non-smoking cabin that they were in. So Pushta Krishna, who was Prabhupada's secretary, was sitting next to Prabhupada, Pushta Krishna Maharaj at that time. He got a little disturbed. This is not very nice. Why Prabhupada should be subjected to this? So he pressed the call button to call for the stewardess. And she came and he explained very nicely, this is the non-smoking area, and could you please ask them to extinguish their cigarettes? So she agreed. She asked these football players to extinguish their cigarettes, which they did do. Then she left. But after a few minutes, they lit up again because they were really drunk. So now, Pushta Krishna could see that he wasn't going to get anywhere with the stewardess. So he decided he was going to take matters into his own hands. So he got up and he was going to get heavy with these guys. And Srila Prabhupada said, oh, where you were going? She said, well, they're smoking, Srila Prabhupada. Sit down. And then Srila Prabhupada looked him right in the eye and said, what is the difference between us and them if we cannot tolerate? So Prabhupada tolerated the cigarette smoke and the rowdiness and everything. He was undisturbed. And he said, what is the difference between us and them if we cannot tolerate? So the pure devotee, the Vaishnava, he exemplifies this. Taroriva Sahishnura, more tolerant than the tree. And then amanina manadena, not desiring any respect for himself or any honor, but desiring to give all respect and honor to others. So pastime, this was just end of 1975 and 76. I think it was January 76. I had arrived in Bombay December 75. And at that time, the Bombay temple was just a hole in the ground with the foundation. And Prabhupada's rooms at that time was at the back of the property, which are now the BBT building. So Prabhupada had come early January 76, I believe, sometime in January. And he wanted to really get this project moving. So the next morning after breakfast prasadam, he had a big meeting in his rooms with all the people who were involved in doing this project, and the sannyasi, the GBC temple president, all the people, everybody. So they're in the room having this big important meeting. Then up the stairs comes the cleaning lady, a Bungi lady from the Bungi colony, not far from the temple. And she has her little balti, the wooden bucket, and her daru, the straw broom, because she comes up every day and cleans the rooms. So she comes up to the top of the landing, and the door is slightly ajar. So she looks through and she sees Prabhupada there speaking, and all the devotees and the architects and the contractors and everything. So she can't go in, but she can't not do her service. She can't go down and forget about it, because that 1 rupee feeds her children. She needs it, so she doesn't know what to do. So she's just standing there. Meanwhile, Prabhupada's speaking, and as he turns his head to the right, he sees through the door that's ajar, he sees the cleaning lady standing there. So immediately he stops the discussion. He says, now we have to stop. The cleaning lady has come. When it's her time to clean, then she's the authority here. Everyone has their area of authority. And when it's her time to clean, she's the authority. So we have to get up and leave. So they got up and leave. So the Jagat Guru recognized the authority of that cleaning lady. Amanina amanadena, giving all respect to others and not desiring any for himself. In this way, kirtaniya sadahari, one is able to chant the holy name of the Lord constantly, which we always saw. Srila Prabhupada always chanting the holy name of the Lord constantly. So here we see that Prabhupada was the embodiment, the personification of that verse, which he said many years back, he had explained to his godbrother that this was the formula to get Krishna praying. And he would spread it the whole world over, and he was the embodiment of that.
Krishna Kirtana Ganana Tanapano Premamritam Manidhi Dhira Dhira Jana Priyau Priyakarau